This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault, and today's episode is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. Well, on the last episode, we covered the Toronto International Film Festival, and now we are back covering another film festival, and that is Cinefest Sudbury. I actually wasn't familiar with this festival before this year, and when TIFF went mostly digital and it came out that there was a limited number of tickets due to distributors wanting it to be that way. I know a lot of people had issues with TIFF and being able to see films. And along with people not being able to buy tickets as much, there was a significant reduction in the amount of press passes handed out. And if you listen to the last episode, I unfortunately wasn't able to get a press pass this year, even though I had one last year. And so I turned my sights over to Cinefest Sudbury, which first caught my attention because they had a number of overlapping films that I wanted to see. And so first that made me curious, but then, looking through their entire roster, they had quite a few really interesting films that I was wanting to see this year. And so I applied, just hoping I'd be able to get it, because much like TIFF and other festivals around the world, they did transfer to be a digital festival this year. And sure enough, I got approved. And to make things even better for the average viewer, you can see any movie available that they were screening digitally for $10, or for $100, you can see as many as you want. So this is such a super audience-friendly festival. And learning more about this festival in general, the fact that it's one of the largest in Canada, it really makes me excited. Actually, I would love to go in person maybe one year. I recently actually was in Sudbury, drove through it on my way out west to visit family, and it's a nice little town, and I'd love to be able to actually spend some time there and not just, drive through it and stop for gas and that sort of thing. But joining me on this episode today is Stephanie Pryor, who watched a bunch of the films with me. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me back.
So last year, you also came to some of the TIFF screenings with me. We shared some of the press passes. We got some free tickets that we were able to go to another one outside. So you're kind of used to this atmosphere of watching several movies in a short period of time, and also ones that we either might not see in theaters for a little while, or ones that, just probably won't get a wide release ever at all. So this is something that you're a little bit familiar with, aren't you?
Yeah, I am a little bit familiar, and I super enjoy it because, when all the big films come out, obviously that gets everyone's attention, but I like seeing all the small ones, the ones you wouldn't necessarily hear about, that tend to be hidden gems for me, and ones that I tend to usually prefer over top of the big, mega hits. So I'm always excited to watch just a bunch of films all together and just figure out, what is my favorite.
And the thing is about with festivals is you can look at some of the bigger names, and, we knew going into TIFF that Nomadland, directed by Chloe Zhao, who's, the next up-and-coming director, starring Frances McDermott, 2-time Best Actress winner, you're probably going to get something that's pretty good. But for the most part, outside of a couple big names in festivals, you really don't know what you're going to get. A lot of times there's no trailers released. You're lucky if it's played at another festival maybe a week before, so you'll get some short reviews. But for the most part, you're going in pretty blind. You'll have a one-sentence description of, oh, this is the story of this person and their struggles doing this. And you're like, well, that sounds like every movie ever made.
Yeah, sometimes the synopsis can be quite generic, but I think that's part of the fun, you just find one that either has an interesting title or one that's oh, that's kind of intriguing. Maybe that's something new.
Yeah.
So you just kind of go into it and hope that it's awesome. Sometimes you see some less than stellar films, but for the most part, they're always super, thought-provoking and intriguing, and still a good watch nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to go in order of the movies that we watched. There's a couple that I watched without you, but, to round this out, the festival had quite a few that I wanted to get around to seeing that we just didn't end up having time for. The Viggo Mortensen Falling, which also played at TIFF, that was one that's kind of been getting a little bit mixed reviews, but one I'm still a little bit curious about. We unfortunately didn't have time to see it. The Last Vermeer, which was only playing on the 27th. That was the other thing with this festival is there were specific time windows of when you could see the films. Some of them were available for almost the entire run of the festival, the entire week and a bit. Some of them were only available for 2 or 3 nights, and some of them, like the last premiere, was only available for 1 day, which was a little bit frustrating, but I understand that that's just, the way it works. If it was an actual festival, probably would have been the only screening. It was, if you can't make it, then too bad, so sad. And then some other interesting ones, Achilles Escape, which was one that was playing at TIFF. I had the opportunity to see a press screening of that early, and I was not able to do it. There was a documentary called The Truffle Hunters, which seems really interesting. A few other ones, Percy, which starred Christopher Walken, Abe, that starred Noah Schnapp from Stranger Things. So all in all, this is a festival that I think had a really good mix of big names to kind of get your attention and smaller, more interesting films that will keep you going back. So without further ado, I'll just, start talking about some of the movies we saw. I'll go in order. So the first one was Lucky Grandma. That was one that I had seen on my own. This is a movie that's directed by Sassy Sealy and starring Sai Chin. I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly. And it's, this really kind of quirky comedy about this older woman who, when she goes to, I don't want to say like fortune teller, but that type of person who tells her that she's about to experience some very good luck. And this woman is like this surly older grandmother who unfortunately lost her husband and hasn't really been the same since, probably mired in bouts of depression, things like that, can't really connect with her son and her grandchildren. And so she goes to a casino, and sure enough, she starts getting very lucky and over and over and over again. And then, unfortunately, she sort of presses her luck a little bit too much and loses everything. And then on the way back to the city on this bus trip with a whole bunch of other seniors, she notices that this kind of gross old man that's sleeping next to her actually dies in his sleep. And she's looking around, poking around, and he's got a duffel bag full of cash, and she decides to keep it because why not? She's lucky and she's earned it. And then from there, it's this sort of really interesting, unique comedy where Chinese gangsters are trying to chase this old lady down in the streets of Chinatown, New York, and she's outwitting them, and she hires a security guard from a rival Chinese gang named Big Pong, who is basically the largest human that you'll ever see, and mixed with this very tiny old lady as well. They make a hilariously adorable couple, and the two of them sort of outwit the gangsters that are very inept chasing after them. I wrote about this movie. I actually wrote about all the movies that we're talking about, and you could see them all on ContraZoomPod.com. I did capsule reviews. I sort of compared it a little bit similar to The Farewell, and not just because it's, films starring Chinese people, but this idea of you have an older person who clearly came from China, immigrated to the United States, and is still kind of very stuck in her traditional Eastern ways. And, she argues with her son about seeing a doctor, and he's like, he's not a real doctor. That's Chinese medicine is not a real medicine. You need to see a real doctor, that sort of thing. And it's the sort of East meets West. So there's a little bit of similarities in The Farewell, but that's about where the similarities end, other than the fact that they're both kind of like comedies that sort of make you feel. So this is one I know was popular earlier this year when it was on different festival circuits. If you get a chance to see Lucky Grandma, I definitely recommend it. It's very lighthearted, very cute, and a fantastic lead performance.
And if Jerry calls, you just say, "Yes, Jerry. I will let my boss know."
Jerry Salinger.
Well, of course, Jerry Salinger. And above all, you never, ever call him.
Why would I call Jerry Salinger?
Jerry doesn't want to hear about how much you love The Catcher in the Rye, and he doesn't want to read your stories.
I don't have stories.
Good. Writers make the worst assistants. Get to work.
Now, the next movie that we saw was one that we actually both saw, and that was called My Salinger Year, which was directed by Philippe Falardeau, who did Monsieur Lazare several years ago, which was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. He is a Canadian director, and this is a movie about a young woman who abruptly leaves college and her boyfriend to move to New York and ends up getting a job at a writer's agency where she is an aspiring writer, and her agency's main client is J.D. Salinger. And so that's where the title sort of comes from. And anyone that knows anything about Salinger, he's a recluse. So most of the interactions that she has is with him over the phone. So she kind of gets this nice relationship going on. And then also she wants to still be a writer, but her boss, who's played by Sigourney Weaver, is like, writers make the worst assistants. I would never hire a writer. And so she has to sort of keep that secret while trying to figure out how to advance her career, and maybe realizing that writing isn't a viable career to begin with, because you have to be so dedicated. That is literally the only thing you can think and breathe and feel, and that's all you want. Screw everything else. And so it's a really nice dichotomy of what sort of life she wants to live. This was a fairly lighthearted film. You know, it's got some nice comedy, it's got some nice drama, but this was one that you really connected with, didn't you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was, it was fun, but also kind of interesting, dived into a few emotional topics, including like mental health and how that can affect a person and the people in their lives. But I just thought the performances were great. I really enjoyed Sigourney Weaver as Margaret, who was Margaret Qualley's, Joanna's boss. But also Margaret Qualley I thought was so fantastic. I thought she brought this youthful, playful, just openness to the character. And this is actually based on a true story, based off of a book. This Joanna actually did write a book about her year at this writer's agency. And so I thought it was just interesting to know that, this stuff happened. And I just liked the way it was filmed because at this agency, she was getting these letters to Salinger, and they were heartfelt and like pouring out their feelings about Catcher in the Rye and characters that they resonated with. And of course, Salinger didn't take any letters, didn't want to see any of them. So Margaret Qualley, playing Joanna, was reading all these, and I love the little vignettes that they did for each letter that she read. I thought it was quite interesting and really well done.
Yeah, it was a really good narrative device where we got to see who these young people are, and she has some conversations with them where it's a little bit of magical realism, where she sort of sees these people in her life as well, but you very clearly know that it is not really happening. It's more just this imaginary dialogue that she's having in her head of what she would assume these people would actually be saying to her if she was to have a dialogue with them. But I think they do a really good job. It's really interesting. The movie actually kind of reminds me a little bit of The Devil Wears Prada. I think for the first third or so, I felt like they were really sort of setting it up to be a budget version of that, with Sigourney Weaver doing her best Miranda Priestley impression as this sort of no-nonsense boss who you are supposed to know everything on your first day. But as the movie sort of went on, there was a bit more depth to it, where I did really appreciate where it kind of was going. The one sort of criticism I do have about it is there's a character played by Colm Feore who we don't really know a ton about, but as soon as we meet him, he's got this super magnetic personality where you just sort of latch on and be like, oh, I like this guy. And then something happens and we're supposed to feel really bad, but I feel like he disappears for such a large chunk of the film that you don't really get the connection you truly need to have the impact of what happens later on with his character for me. Is that something that bothered you at all?
No, it didn't bother me, actually. I just, I think it was just another part and realization of that point that she was at in her life and her career at the agency. And I don't think, at least I wasn't taken aback by how non-emotional it was. It still felt like a big, moment, but it seemed to be more leading her towards things in her own life that she was dealing with.
That's fair. And I think that final act cemented Sigourney Weaver's performance for me. At first, I thought it was a little one note, a little too, like I was saying, Miranda Priestley imitation. But towards the end, I think she really made the character her own.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so the next movie I want to talk about is one that I saw on my own, the last one I saw on my own, and that was called Mogul Mowgli, which was directed by Bassam Tariq. And so this is a film that stars Riz Ahmed, who co-wrote the film with the director Tariq, about this British Pakistani rapper who's, looks like he, after grinding it out for so long, he finally is able to catch a bit of a break by being the opening act for a much larger hip-hop artist, and this is going to be his big break. Unfortunately, right before he's about to go on tour, he ends up collapsing in an alleyway and gets taken to a hospital. And it turns out he's got this degenerative disease, which is basically eating his muscles. I don't think they actually name it, and forgive me for not knowing it offhand, but his white blood cells is basically eating his muscles, so it atrophies and he has no strength. He can't get up, he can't walk, he can't do anything, that sort of thing. All the while, he is trying to recover fast enough to be able to go on this tour that's supposed to start in a week after his accident. So it's a little, at that point, you sort of expect this of trying to overcome the odds, but they sort of throw in a bit of a twist where he's having these medical hallucinations where, you know, a big part of this film is this idea of his parents had to escape India during the partition when India broke up and became India and Pakistan. And so his father had to flee India because he's not Hindu, he was Muslim, to Pakistan, which was the Muslim country, and what sort of horrors he had to face. And this was something that that Zed, who is played by Riz Ahmed, tries to ignore and just sort of brush under the rug, while at the same time still imbuing his music with this sort of, this is my culture, this is my heritage. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, and I think the hallucination sequences are very interesting. There's a character named Toba Tek Singh, which, if you're familiar with Pakistani literature, which I was not, I had to look this up, is this very famous political satire short story from 1955 about asylum patients who are being traded between Pakistan and India during this time. And so this character sort of haunts Zed for a good portion of the film, and it really sort of helps him reconnect with his roots, and in the end has a really good job where it influences his music and makes him have a deeper connection with his actual history, his familial history with Pakistan. This is a film that I think has some really good performances from Riz Ahmed and the man who plays his father, Alvi Khan. But other than that, it's a little too one note, a little bit too basic at times of what you would expect from this sort of type of drama. But the music is excellent. This was something that Ahmed also helped create. He is a rapper in his own right, so he wrote his own raps, and he worked on that as well. So interesting, but overall, I'm very mixed on it.
Canadian democracy is under threat
This is the sovereign territory of Quebec.
from democracy.
Can everybody just fucking speak English?
Implicit in this tasking is that you do not create a goddamn international incident
French life matter!
on some shit road in the middle of Cascola fuck nowhere.
J'ai déjà cru au Canada.
Merci pour le papier cul!
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé?
What pipelines?
J'habitais à Toronto.
The next movie that we both saw was one called Quebexit. This is a film directed by Joshua Demers and co-written by the director and two of the actors in it, Gail Maurice and Xavier Yuven. And this is a very interesting satire where, obviously, with the name Quebexit, Quebec has twice now had a referendum whether or not they want to separate from Canada. And in this movie, it positions that Quebec had a third referendum and had a successful vote to leave campaign, sort of modeled after the way Brexit has went, where they voted to leave and then the European Union, and then all of a sudden they realized that there were so many tiny logistical issues that were never thought out, never properly communicated. You know, according to the people, it was just a yes or a no, with no idea how free trade and commerce and travel between countries would work out. And this is something that sort of played up in Canada. In the last election, you know, there was mumblings of Quebec wanting to leave again, but even louder was a Western exit, mostly coming out of Alberta. And so we sort of get this idea where at the Quebec and New Brunswick border, the newly formed Republic of Quebec decides to put up a roadblock where they would inspect people coming and going, It starts out simple enough where they're just letting people know that they are now entering and leaving a new country, but soon the Canadian Army shows up and sets up their own opposing roadblock, and they also try keeping it civil, but they also keep trying to one-up each other before you get to know it. It's, much like comedy where the stakes have to keep getting higher and higher, and things get a little bit more ridiculous and ridiculous. Overall, I thought this was a pretty interesting political satire that I thought had some funny moments. How did it work for you?
Yeah, I thought it was, for the most part, pretty good, pretty funny. It did feel a little long at times, but there were tiny little nuggets in there that were hilarious and so poignant that I think really worked for it. There was also the aspect of the Micmac, community, and how they're like, this isn't your land anyway. Why, you're fighting over this? This is our land, and you both should go, kind of thing. So I thought that was also an interesting part to tie in and to show, we can be fighting over these things, but there's stuff under the surface that we still have to deal with, and it's still going on outside of, the bigger issues, which tend to all be the bigger issues. But one of my favorite parts of this one was this French gentleman from France who was a teacher or a professor, and he had left Quebec to go somewhere, I suppose, and was coming
into New Brunswick.
Yeah. For some reason, we don't know, but he's trying to come back into Quebec. And at this point, the stakes are at such a point where they're not letting anyone without a French Canadian ID back into the country of France, of Quebec. Mm-hmm. So they turn him around, and he goes back to the Canadian marker, which is 100 yards away. Yeah. And they're like, no, they have to let you in. They're still part of Canada. Go back. And there's this poor guy who's caught in between, and every once in a while in the different scenes that happens, he's still there in the middle of this limbo between both Quebec and New Brunswick. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Mm. If you're any sort of a political junkie, I think you'll probably get some good laughs over a lot of it. There's a lot of parallels between what is happening over in Brexit with how they position it. In my review, I kind of wrote about there's this with Northern Ireland and Ireland, they have not had a hard border for a very long time, because when there was one, there was very intense violence going on between the two countries. And there is concerns that there is going to have to be another border put up once Brexit is finally done and the United Kingdom fully separates from the European Union. And this sort of similar thing where Quebec sort of slowly floats the idea of having a more hard border between them, and that's when the violence actually starts to erupt. Some gunfire gets exchanged, someone gets shot, that sort of thing. So this idea of sort of mining real world for comedy, I think that they do a really good job of that. And they also, if any Canadian, you'll be able to kind of make jokes that are very regional specific, where I think you'll sort of appreciate on the screen, whether they're in Quebec or New Brunswick, it'll always tell you what part you're in. And so it'll be at the border in Quebec, at the border of New Brunswick. But then at one point they go into New Brunswick, and it's fucking deep in New Brunswick, in fucking New Brunswick. So it's really funny, because New Brunswick is often sort of the forgotten province a little bit. It is very French Canadian as well. A good portion of the people there are bilingual, if not straight up French communities. So this really would impact them in ways, because they do share a lot of cultural similarities with Quebec compared to the rest of English speaking Canada. And if there is a hard border between them, I think there would be some real issues. But of course, the biggest problem is the Indigenous rights, where you're trying to put up borders on a country that you've already taken from them and saying where they can and cannot go. And of course, they're laughing because you've been doing this for several hundred years now. What difference is this now?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really funny movie. I don't want to use low budget as a
bare bones.
Yeah, as a prerogative way. But it basically takes place in these sort of two camps of one border crossing and another border crossing between the English and the French language section. So It's definitely worth checking out. I don't know where it's going to be available. I wouldn't be surprised if it pops up on some sort of streaming service or something. But I don't think this is the type of movie that's going to get a lot of attention. But it's definitely one that I think people would enjoy. The next movie that we saw was one called Black Bear, directed by Lawrence Michael Levine. This might be the toughest movie to talk about because I feel like the less people know about it going in, probably the better.
Yeah, agreed.
And I wrote in my review, I kind of describe a little bit, but I didn't want to describe any more. But basically, you have this three-hander where you have Aubrey Plaza, who plays this former actor turned writer and director named Allison, and she's arriving in this secluded cabin in the woods that is lived at by this married couple, not married couple, Mike and Blair, who are not married but are expecting. And right from the get-go, there was this really weird, awkward tension, and I wasn't fully on board right away because they were like starting at like a 15, where they're like right at each other's throats, where the type of movie you'd expect it to escalate up to, you know, maybe 45 minutes, an hour in, when they finally, you know, all the walls sort of break down. So I was a little confused from the get-go of why everyone was super intense from the get-go. But then something happens and it shifts and we get an accident that occurs. Someone gets severely injured. And then it cuts to black. And then it's basically a different movie. And I don't want to say a ton, but basically a movie is being filmed. And I feel like I'm giving too much away.
I feel like you've already given too much away. You've basically given the plot of the first part, and then you've led into the second. Basically, it's just about this filmmaker who is a writer at a secluded house who's already lived in by these two people. There's a part one and there's a part two. How about we go with that?
Yeah, that works. It's such a hard movie to describe, to talk about it all without describing things. But needless to say, despite throughout the whole movie, it is about manipulating other people. Who are you lying to? Are you lying to yourself? What are you trying to get out of the other people? Who is on your side? Who isn't on your side? It's very much, you're not quite sure who stands what where, how intoxicated really is someone. That, like, alcohol plays a big part, and weed as well, where you're getting intoxicated and you believe them that they're actually intoxicated, and then you sort of question it. Are they maybe just putting on a bit of a show?
Yeah.
And it kind of like makes you reevaluate everything you're watching. I think if anyone had seen the movie The One I Love, which was a film that starred Elizabeth Moss and Mark Duplass, about this couple that goes away to a vacation home, and then all of a sudden they start seeing duplicates of themselves and things start happening.
Yeah.
It's a very dark and weird comedy, emphasis on the dark part. If you were a fan of that movie, I think you'd really like Black Bear.
It's funny you mentioned that because we didn't talk about that, but this movie definitely gave me those vibes.
Yeah.
Like straight out the gate. I was like, oh, this feels so much like this movie. Not for like plot or anything like that, but just this similar vibe and feel for it. It's definitely an interesting watch, and it definitely makes you think, and it's still one that's lingering with me that I would love to revisit after a time apart to try and, figure it out or just see it in a new light potentially, because I feel like this is a type of film you could watch and get different feelings and different reactions and meanings at separate watches.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I'm not going to explain anything about it, but it definitely leaves you with an ending where you're like, wait, did it mean this, or did it mean this, or am I just completely off kilter? Am I stupid? Did I miss something? Where you're definitely like, whoa, what does that ending mean? All of a sudden.
Like, wait a minute, am I intoxicated right now?
Exactly, yeah. But it's basically a three-hander between Aubrey Plaza, Sarah Gadon, and Christopher Abbott. And the three of them all do such a terrific job where you really can't tell from one moment to the next who is playing who and who has the upper hand.
Yeah, for sure. I think the three of them are so great, and I have to give props to Christopher Abbott because I think he was my favorite in part two, we'll call it, because I think it is called part two. But just the character shift and change from part one, I thought it was great.
Absolutely.
Science is changing. And the very people who are running science are the people who believe the world is flat. And I'm going to prove them wrong.
You're Maria Sklodowska. I'm Pierre Curie. Your science is brilliant.
You're proposing a partnership.
That's exactly what I'm doing. You're just extraordinary.
The next movie that we watched was one called Radioactive, which was directed by Marjane Satrapi. And it stars Rosamund Pike, and it's a biopic about Marie Curie, the famous French and Polish physicist who discovers two elements, polonium and I can't remember radium, and her husband with her relationship with her husband Pierre Curie, and she's a Nobel Prize winner. And I'm falling asleep because this movie, just pass on it. It's an Amazon original, so it's definitely going to be out there, and you're going to have the option to see it when you fire up your Amazon Prime account. And whatever you do not watch this movie. It is so bad.
Wow, harsh. But I would have to agree with you, unfortunately. It's just a really oddly stylized version of her whole career. So it feels like it both feels too slow and too fast at the same time, where you're just skimming over parts but diving into weird moments that don't seem to need the recognition that it's getting. So it's an interesting watch.
Yeah, and it stars Rosamund Pike, who I like to think is a good actress. I haven't seen a ton of her stuff, but of course, she's fantastic in stuff like Gone Girl, and she's playing such over the top, over dramatic, where she's either, don't tell me what to do. I work on my own. No one works with me. I do everything by myself. I'm a strong, independent woman. And then the next scene, she's basically like, I don't know what to do. Everything is terrible. Life is the worst. Why did you do this to me? And it just sort of, her character doesn't really make any sense. But the biggest problem is it just is what's a big beat that we can cover in our life? Great. We'll talk about that for 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next beat where there was no real connective tissue. It was just how many big moments can you cram in?
Yeah, it just felt like they were trying to touch on too many parts, and it just didn't have enough depth for me in any one aspect, in any one character. So you didn't really feel invested or really care about what was happening or to these characters or even in the story or this historical retelling. And it has this vibe, this feel like it's a forensic show, especially with the score, which I found a really odd choice, and it was kind of off-putting because it didn't make it feel serious. It kind of made it feel like a joke.
Well, right from the get-go, you were like, this kind of feels like a Murdoch Mysteries episode. And it really did, where it's got this sort of dark Victorian era and a big, God bless Murdoch Mysteries. It does what it does really well, and it has a niche audience, but it's basically this thing hasn't been invented yet, but you people watching know what it is. Wink, wink. We're going to pretend we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And it sort of feels like this movie is like this at times, where they're talking about the poisonous aspects of radium and polonium, and they're like, oh, who knows what this does? Oh, look at this. I'm getting lesions on myself. I wonder what this means. Wink, wink.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm coughing blood all the time. Why?
Yeah. Yes, it is quite... I don't even know what it was going for. It was an interesting choice, the way it was directed and the way it was shot. But...
There's way too much CGI in this movie. Way too much.
There was so much more than it was necessary. I mean, given the time that it takes place and the stuff that's going on, I feel like there was no CGI needed whatsoever.
I'm guessing they didn't have the budget to actually build the full sets, so they're probably shooting on very tiny sets and then decided to fill in Paris as much as CGI as you can. And they basically overcompensate by doing these big filters, sweeping shots.
Too.
Yeah, and these filters, but these big sweeping shots across Paris, and you're like, this is just completely CGIing the city. But yeah, there's these weird filters where you basically kind of feel like you're
in a haze or a dream, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's the worst joke you can make of bad Instagram filters of someone filming through that at times.
Yeah, which was really confusing because there are flashback moments, but they felt as grounded as reality did in this film, because there was no differentiator between the two. So you're like, well, I know that this is a flashback, but it feels exactly the same as their current time.
Sam Riley, who played Pierre Curie, I thought did okay as far as if I was to probably single out one of the performances. He kind of did the best, whereas I understood where his emotions were coming from.
Agreed.
And you understand his rationale in most of the scenes. But like Rosamund Pike, like what were you doing in this movie? And then of course they're like, the third build actor in this is Anya Taylor-Joy, who shows up for 20 minutes at the very end as the grown-up daughter of the Curies, and she's wearing this terrible wig and is overacting the hell out of everything too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd mentioned this while we were watching it. When there's a bad script, there's no matter how good an actor you are, it's very hard to turn it around. And I think it suffered from so many things that there was no one person or a thing that could save it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I wish I could continue ragging on this movie, and I do not feel guilty about it because no one involved with this will ever listen to that. But the last movie we will talk about, and we'll end on a much higher note, is Another Round, which is the new Danish film from Thomas Vinterberg, and it stars Mads Mikkelsen. The two of them previously paired up on the fantastic The Hunt from a couple years ago. But if you're not familiar with this movie by now, it was talked about in the TIFF recap episode, so you can go back and listen to John and Maria reviewing it too. But this is about four friends who are all teachers at a school who decide to test out this theory that if you have a minimum blood alcohol level in your system at all times, you function better in society. You're more alert, attentive, spontaneous, courageous, a whole bunch of positive attributes. And so they're doing this and they're getting good results. So they decide to up it a little bit more by a little bit more, and sort of disaster ensues, basically. It's kind of a comedy. It starts out as a comedy, but then of course, when you realize that you're dealing with functioning alcoholics, it gets pretty serious pretty quickly. That said, if you'd seen The Hunt, you know how fantastic Mikkelsen and Vinterberg are together, and this is no exception. The two of them once again hit an absolute home run of a film.
Yeah, I have to say, I think Danish films are starting to creep into some of my favorite foreign films, because I've seen quite a few now and they're always amazing. So that's exciting for me as a realization that I have to get into some more Danish films. But also I'll watch anything with Mads Mikkelsen.
I think that's what you like.
So
you just
amazing.
Like Mads Mikkelsen's Danish films.
Well, I have to say most of the Danish films I have seen have starred him, so maybe there is some sort of correlation, but I digress. It is a great film. Fantastically acted from all four leading men. And I think the subject matter is super interesting. And, just what comes about from their experiment, I think is quite telling. And you can see how each of it is affecting each of these four men's lives in a different way, good or bad. So I thought it was quite a ride. And yeah, it was great. It was fantastic.
I think the most interesting part is Vinterberg's camera does not look down upon these characters. We don't watch them and go, yes, these are clearly bad people. They're doing bad things. We should punish them. We should feel bad for them. We're kind of sort of left on our own of, well, what they were doing, was it good? They clearly had some positive attributes, and then when they ended up abusing the substance, then of course there were some repercussions, but at the same time, like you're sort of left on your own to decide how good or how bad these people actually are. So I appreciate that it wasn't rammed down our throat of, you need to pity them or you need to condemn them. Like it very much was up to your interpretation. And I think at the end of it, you don't. I don't think I neither pity or endorse what they did or look down upon them.
No, yeah, you just kind of feel, at peace with what happened and where they are and where you are currently too. So, I think it is a really good job.
Yeah, especially since there was a bit of a tragedy towards the end, which we won't really divulge, in how it affects them going forward. I think they do a really good job sort of handling that where it is a little ambiguous as far as exactly what will happen next in these characters' lives.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely think this is a film that's going to be nominated for Best International Film. There's no way that Denmark will not be submitting this after getting a nomination for The Hunt previously with Vinterberg, especially with Mikkelsen being a Hollywood star as well, being in movies like Casino Royale and the TV show Hannibal. So I would not be surprised if it absolutely gets a nomination for Best International Film. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Mikkelsen is, on the fringes talked about Best Actor contention with so many movies being pushed back to next year. Maybe he sort of swoops in and gets that like number 5 spot for Best Actor.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
For sure.
We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we are going to actually hand out our seven films. If you liked what we talked about, make sure you go to ContraZoomPod.com. There's short little reviews of all the movies that we talked about there as well. Make sure you also have checked out the TIFF Wrapup episode 2. Lots of good content there. But we're going to give out our own awards because Cinefest Sudbury does give out awards for best feature film. So we're going to do that. What was our best film we saw? And then best performances, both actor and actress, without regard for lead or supporting. Just who we thought gave the best performances. So what was your best film?
My best film, definitely, hands down, was Another Round. I thought it was fantastic. It was great from start to finish. It felt, well-rounded and really honed in on its subject matter and kept me engaged the entire time.
Yeah, I agree. Another Round is my best film as well. I really love this. I think the camera work is excellent. There's some really clever shots that go on, and you really connect with the story that's being told. It was the only one that I had a bit of an emotional reaction to, so I definitely appreciate that too. I also highly recommend both Black Bear and Lucky Grandma. Those are ones that I think are definitely worth checking out too. So, who was your best actor?
My best actor has to go to Mads Mikkelsen, of course. I think he's amazing in everything that he does, but just also in this film, he grounds all 4 guys. He's the main protagonist of this movie, and you're just there with him the entire time. Mm-hmm. He does a great job.
Yeah, I also give it to Mads Mikkelsen. We're a bit of a broken record here, but it is such a fantastic performance. He starts out this film so disconnected from life. He asks his wife if he's boring now because his students don't connect with him, and his wife basically confirms that yes, he is boring and not the man that she fell in love with. And when he undertakes this experiment and how he sort of reconnects with his past and who he wants to be, who he thinks he is, all this sort of stuff. We get this such well-rounded, faceted performance from Mads. I won't say it's a career best because I think The Hunt is probably a career best performance from him, but this is right there up there with it, and I really hope that it gets the accolades he deserves for it. Now, lastly, what is your best actress?
So I have to say I am very excited that I am at, conflict with who to choose. Normally when we have like our best picks for actress or supporting actress during our Oscar podcasts, it's very slim picking sometimes, the different decades of who we can pick. And I feel like I have a smorgasbord of ladies to pick from here. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing. And I'm super happy that the movies we watched had such strong female performances and characters that were present. That being said, I think I have to finally give it to Margaret Qualley from My Salinger Year. I thought she was great, and just her vibrancy that she brought to the character and the screen was really great, and I loved her earnest performance of this kind of naive, young, college dropout in New York trying to find her way. Was really great. I almost wanted to give it to Sigourney Weaver, just because of that last scene we had with her. But I think that Margaret really ties in. She's the core of this film, and I think she did a fantastic job.
Wow, that's a good one. I wasn't too sure where you were going to go with it, but I'm glad you went with that one. I would have to go with Aubrey Plaza. I'm very close to wanting to both give it to both her and Sarah Gadon as like a sort of tie, because I don't think this movie works as well as it does without knowing that both of them together really contribute to it. So that said, it's tough. Aubrey Plaza, obviously, everyone sort of knows her from Parks and Recreation and what a deadpan humor she has. And at first, that sort of seemed what character she was going with, but especially in part 2, where we get to sort of understand where that first part was coming from, I think did a really excellent job with that performance, and definitely one that people should be on the lookout for. I would almost sort of favorably compare it to her performance in Ingrid Goes West.
Yeah, I had the same feeling.
Which, if you were a fan of that movie too, you probably like this one as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that about wraps it up. Cinefest Sudbury was excellent. I really loved it. I hope that we can cover it again in the future. Steph, what were your overall thoughts about the festival?
I thought it was great. I think if they have a great selection of films from, big to small to, foreign to whatever you're looking for. So one I was also not familiar with, and definitely am excited going forward each year too.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Cinefest Sudbury, for giving us the press passes. Really appreciate it. As I said, make sure you go to ContraZoomPod.com, where you will see reviews for the movies and, of course, all your other ContraZoom Pod needs, including all past shows and guest appearances and all that fun stuff. I want to thank Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and of course Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. So thank you for that, and thank you for being a guest here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Aesthetic Magazine for presenting the show. Make sure you follow it on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ContraZoomPod. And once again, I'll plug it again. Visit ContraZoomPod.com, bookmark it, because I'll be adding tons of great content there over time. And if you can, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And send me a screenshot, ContraZoomPod@gmail.com, and I'll add you to my mailing list, and I'll send you some free swag when that becomes available very, very shortly. So thank you so much for listening.